The morning sun cast long shadows across the Montana wilderness as Jake Morrison guided his horse through the dense pine forest. At 42, Jake had spent most of his adult life working the remote corners of his family's sprawling ranch, but today felt different. Something in the crisp October air seemed to whisper of change, though he couldn't have imagined just how dramatically his world was about to shift. Jake pulled his worn leather jacket tighter against the mountain chill. His breath formed small clouds in the cold air as he surveyed the rugged landscape that had been his home for over 2 decades. The Morrison Ranch covered nearly 15,000 acres of some of the most beautiful and unforgiving terrain in the state. Most of it remained untouched wilderness, accessible only on horseback or on foot. His father, Thomas Morrison, had built the ranch from nothing in the 1970s. Starting with just 500 acres and a dream, Thomas had slowly expanded the operation through decades of hard work and careful planning. When a heart attack claimed his life 3 years ago, Jake inherited not just the land, but the responsibility of maintaining his father's legacy. The nearest neighbor lived 12 miles away, and the closest town, Cedar Falls, was a 30-minute drive on good roads. In winter, when the mountain passes became treacherous, Jake often went weeks without seeing another soul. He had grown accustomed to the solitude, finding peace in the rhythm of ranch work and the company of his animals. Today's mission was to check on the old line shacks scattered throughout the remote sections of the property. These small cabins, built decades ago to shelter cowboys during roundups and harsh weather, were rarely used anymore. But Jake made it a point to inspect them regularly, ensuring they remained weatherproof and stocked with emergency supplies. In this unforgiving country, a sturdy shelter could mean the difference between life and death. His horse, Thunder, picked his way carefully along a narrow trail that wound through towering pines and across rushing streams. Jake had raised Thunder from a colt, and the two moved together with an almost telepathic understanding. The horse seemed to sense his rider's moods and responded accordingly, whether Jake needed speed, patience, or simply companionship during long days in the saddle. As they climbed higher into the mountains, Jake's mind wandered to the challenges facing the ranch. Beef prices had been volatile in recent years, and the cost of feed and fuel continued to rise. He employed only 2 full-time hands, Carlos and Billy, both of whom had worked for his father before him. They were good men, loyal and hardworking, but Jake knew he couldn't afford to expand the crew even if he wanted to. The isolation that had once comforted him was beginning to feel like a burden. At 42, Jake had never married, though he had come close once. Sarah Mitchell had been a teacher in Cedar Falls, and for 2 years they had talked about building a life together. But she had ultimately chosen to take a job in Denver, unable to imagine herself in the remote wilderness that Jake called home. Since then, Jake had thrown himself into ranch work with renewed intensity. He told himself he was content with his solitary life, but lately, the silence seemed to echo more loudly than usual. The ranch house, built to accommodate a large family, felt cavernous with just him rattling around inside its walls. Thunder's ears suddenly pricked forward, interrupting Jake's thoughts. The horse had stopped in a small clearing, his attention focused on something ahead. Jake followed the horse's gaze and spotted the first line shack of the day. The small log cabin sat nestled among the pines, its weathered exterior blending naturally with the surrounding forest. Built in the 1980s by Jake's father and a crew of local carpenters, the cabin was sturdy and well-constructed. It featured a single room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchenette, and sleeping space for 4 people. Solar panels installed 5 years ago provided basic electricity for lights and a radio. As Jake approached the cabin, something seemed off. Thunder had become increasingly agitated, snorting and dancing sideways. The horse's instincts were usually reliable, and Jake had learned to trust them completely. He dismounted and tied Thunder to a sturdy pine, speaking softly to calm the animal. Walking toward the cabin, Jake noticed that the front door stood slightly ajar. This was unusual, as he always made sure to secure the buildings during his inspections. The wind could damage an unsecured door, and animals sometimes sought shelter inside if given the opportunity. He also noticed fresh tire tracks in the soft earth near the cabin. The tracks appeared to be from a truck or SUV, and they looked recent. Jake frowned, wondering who might have been on this remote section of his property. Hunters sometimes crossed onto private land despite the posted signs, but hunting season hadn't started yet. Jake called out as he approached the door. "Hello, anyone there?" His voice echoed among the trees, but no response came from within the cabin. He pushed the door open slowly, letting his eyes adjust to the dim interior. The cabin appeared empty at first glance. Sunlight streaming through the windows illuminated dust motes dancing in the air. The furniture remained in its usual positions, and nothing seemed obviously disturbed, but something felt wrong. There was a presence in the space, a sense that the cabin had been occupied recently. Jake stepped inside, his boots creaking on the wooden floor. The air held a faint smell of food and wood smoke, indicating someone had used the fireplace and prepared meals here. He also detected something else, something that made his heart skip a beat. It was the unmistakable scent of baby powder. Moving deeper into the cabin, Jake's eyes fell on the small kitchenette area. Dishes sat in the sink and crumbs littered the counter. Someone had definitely been staying here, and recently. But who would bring a baby to this isolated location? A soft sound from the back corner of the cabin made Jake freeze. It was barely audible, but in the wilderness silence, even the smallest noise seemed amplified. He turned slowly, his heart pounding as he tried to identify the source. There in the shadowy corner, behind the old wooden table, Jake saw something that stopped him in his tracks. A small bundle wrapped in blankets lay on a makeshift bed of sleeping bags and pillows. For a moment, his brain refused to process what he was seeing. Then the bundle moved, and a tiny cry pierced the silence. Jake's world tilted on its axis as he realized he was looking at a baby, alone and apparently abandoned in the middle of nowhere. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to help, but shock had temporarily paralyzed his body. The baby's cries grew louder, more insistent. The sound seemed to break through Jake's paralysis, and he rushed forward, his rancher's instincts taking over. Gently, he lifted the blankets to reveal a child who appeared to be perhaps 6 months old, with dark hair and bright blue eyes that were now fixed on his face. "Hey there, little one," Jake said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "Where did you come from?" The baby's cries subsided slightly at the sound of his voice, but Jake could see that the child was hungry and probably needed changing. Looking around frantically, he spotted a diaper bag near the makeshift bed, along with bottles and formula. As he tended to the baby's immediate needs, Jake's mind raced with questions. How had a baby ended up alone in this remote cabin? Where were the parents? Had something terrible happened to them? He found a note tucked into the diaper bag, written in shaky handwriting. "Please take care of Emma. I can't keep her safe anymore. She deserves better than what I can give her." Emma, the baby, had a name, and someone had made the desperate decision to leave her here, apparently hoping Jake would find her. But how could anyone have known he would come to this particular cabin on this particular day? As he held Emma in his arms, trying to soothe her cries, Jake noticed something else that made his blood run cold. On the wooden table nearby lay a driver's license, apparently dropped by whoever had left the baby here. The photo showed a young woman with long brown hair and haunted eyes. But it was the name on the license that sent shock waves through Jake's system, bringing back memories he had tried to bury for years. The name read Jennifer Morrison. Morrison, his family name. Jake sank into the nearest chair, Emma still in his arms, as the implications crashed over him like an avalanche. Could this baby be related to him? Was Jennifer a relative he didn't know about? His father had mentioned having a younger sister who had run away as a teenager, but that was decades ago. With trembling hands, Jake reached for his satellite phone to call the sheriff's department, but then stopped. Something held him back, an instinct that told him to think carefully before involving the authorities. If Emma was family, if she was somehow connected to the Morrison bloodline, then she belonged here on the ranch. Emma had settled into his arms, her tiny hand grasping his finger with surprising strength. Looking down at her peaceful face, Jake felt something shift deep inside his chest. This child needed protection, needed someone to fight for her, and every fiber of his being told him that he was meant to be that person. The rational part of his mind insisted he should call for help immediately. A baby abandoned in the wilderness was a matter for law enforcement and social services. But another part of him, the part that had been shaped by years of solitude and self-reliance, whispered that some things were meant to be handled differently. Thunder whinnied nervously outside, reminding Jake that they were still miles from civilization. The sun was beginning its afternoon descent, and the mountain air would turn bitter cold once darkness fell. Whatever decision he made about Emma's future would have to wait until they reached the safety of the ranch house. Gathering the baby's supplies, Jake fashioned a makeshift carrier from one of the blankets and secured Emma against his chest. She seemed content there, as if she somehow understood that she was safe in his arms. Before leaving the cabin, Jake took one last look around, searching for any additional clues about Jennifer Morrison and what had driven her to leave her baby in this remote location. He found nothing else, but the questions multiplied in his mind with each passing moment. As he mounted Thunder with Emma secure against his chest, Jake realized that his solitary life had just ended forever. Whether through blood relation or divine intervention, this child had been placed in his care, and he would not abandon that responsibility. The ride back to the ranch house took on new urgency as Jake navigated the mountain trails with his precious cargo. Emma slept peacefully against his chest, seemingly untroubled by the motion of the horse or the weight of the uncertain future that lay ahead. By the time the ranch house came into view, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, Jake had made his decision. He would not call the authorities immediately. Instead, he would use his resources to investigate Jennifer Morrison's identity and circumstances. If she was family, as he suspected, then Emma belonged with him regardless of what the law might say. But first, he had to learn how to care for a 6-month-old baby, a challenge that made running a 15,000-acre ranch seem simple by comparison. As Thunder's hooves clattered across the wooden bridge leading to the ranch yard, Jake found himself speaking softly to the sleeping child in his arms. "Welcome home, Emma Morrison," he whispered. "I don't know what brought you here, but I promise you'll be safe now." The words felt like a vow, binding and sacred, spoken under the vast Montana sky that had witnessed 3 generations of Morrison family history. And somewhere deep in his heart, Jake knew that finding Emma in that remote cabin was not an accident, but the beginning of a story that would change both their lives forever. Thunder carried them into the ranch yard as the sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, marking the end of Jake Morrison's last day as a solitary rancher and the beginning of his unexpected journey into fatherhood. Carlos emerged from the barn, his weathered face creasing into a confused frown as he took in the sight of his boss carrying what appeared to be a baby. "Senor Jake," he called out in his heavily accented English. "What is this?" Jake dismounted carefully, making sure not to disturb Emma, who continued sleeping peacefully against his chest. "Carlos, I need you to call Billy and ask him to come to the house. We have a situation here that's going to require all hands on deck." The older man approached cautiously, his eyes widening as he realized that Jake was indeed holding an infant. "Dios mío," he breathed. "Where did you find her?" "The old line shack up on Copper Ridge," Jake replied, already moving toward the house. "I'll explain everything once Billy gets here, but right now I need to figure out how to take care of a baby." Carlos nodded, understanding immediately that questions could wait. In his 20 years working for the Morrison family, he had learned to trust his employer's judgment completely. If Jake said they had a situation, then they would handle it together, just as they had handled every other challenge the mountain country had thrown at them. As Jake climbed the steps to the ranch house porch, Emma stirred in his arms, her blue eyes opening to take in her new surroundings. For a moment, their gazes met, and Jake felt something profound pass between them. This child was his responsibility now, whatever the circumstances that had brought her here. The ranch house door closed behind them with a soft click, sealing them both into a new chapter of their lives that would test everything Jake thought he knew about love, sacrifice, and the true meaning of family. The ranch house kitchen had never felt so inadequate as Jake stood in the middle of it, holding Emma while trying to figure out the basics of baby care. The massive room, designed to feed ranch hands during busy seasons, seemed to mock him with its industrial-sized appliances and lack of anything remotely baby-friendly. Emma had been fussing for the better part of an hour, and Jake's confidence was rapidly evaporating. He had successfully fed her a bottle, managed to change her diaper without disaster, and even gotten her to smile once, but now she seemed determined to exercise her lungs at full volume. "Come on, sweetheart," he murmured, bouncing her gently while packing the length of the kitchen. "Work with me here, I'm new at this." The sound of truck engines in the yard announced the arrival of Carlos and Billy. Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him as he heard their voices on the porch. If anyone could help him figure out this impossible situation, It would be these two men who had become his closest friends and confidants over the years. Billy Thompson burst through the kitchen door first, his young face flushed with excitement and confusion. At 26, Billy had worked the ranch for 4 years, ever since graduating from the local agricultural college. He was like a younger brother to Jake, eager and hardworking, with an infectious enthusiasm for ranch life. "Boss, Carlos said you found a baby." Billy's eyes widened as he took in the sight of Jake holding Emma. "Holy cow, you actually did." Carlos followed more sedately, his weathered hands already reaching for Emma with the confidence of a man who had raised 5 children of his own. "May I?" he asked, gently. Jake gratefully handed Emma to the older man, watching in amazement as her cries immediately subsided. Carlos had a natural way with children, and Emma seemed to sense his calm competence. "She is beautiful," Carlos said softly, examining Emma with experienced eyes. "Perhaps 6 months, maybe 7, healthy but tired, she has been traveling." "Traveling?" Billy pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. "Jake, what the hell is going on? Where did she come from?" Jake retrieved the driver's license from his jacket pocket and placed it on the kitchen table. "I found her in the line shack up on Copper Ridge. Someone left her there with this." Both men leaned forward to examine the license. Billy's eyebrows shot up at the name. "Morrison, you think she's related to you?" "I don't know what to think," Jake admitted, slumping into his own chair. "My dad mentioned having a sister once, but that was years ago. He said she ran away when she was 16 and never came back." Carlos nodded thoughtfully as he continued to soothe Emma. "My grandmother, she always said that children find their way to where they belong. Maybe this little one, she knows something we do not." Billy picked up the license, studying the photo more carefully. "Jennifer Morrison, age 24, address in Billings. That's only about 3 hours from here. You could drive there tomorrow and try to find her." "What if I don't want to find her?" The words came out of Jake's mouth before he could stop them, surprising everyone in the room, including himself. The silence stretched out uncomfortably as both men stared at him. Emma had fallen asleep in Carlos's arms, her tiny face peaceful and trusting. "Jake," Billy said carefully, "you can't just keep someone else's baby." "Why not?" Jake stood up and began packing again, his emotions churning. "Someone abandoned her in the middle of nowhere. What kind of person does that? What if Jennifer Morrison is in trouble? What if she's mixed up with dangerous people? What if giving Emma back means putting her in danger?" Carlos looked up from the sleeping baby. "These are good questions, but they are not for us to answer alone. This is a matter for the police, no." Jake stopped packing and turned to face his friends. "What if we wait? Just a day or two. Let me try to find out more about Jennifer Morrison before we involve the authorities." "And how exactly are you going to do that?" Billy asked. Jake pulled out his satellite phone. "I'm going to call my dad's lawyer, Sam Peterson. If my father had a sister named Jennifer, Sam would know about it. He handled all of Dad's legal affairs for 30 years. The plan made sense, but Jake could see the worry in both men's faces. He understood their concerns, but something deep in his gut told him that involving the authorities immediately would be a mistake. Emma needed protection, and until he understood the full situation, he was the only one who could provide it. Carlos stood up carefully, still holding Emma. "I will stay tonight," he announced. "My Rosa, she will understand. This little one, she will need care through the night, and you do not know how." "Carlos, you don't have to." I do," the older man interrupted firmly. "You found her, so she is your responsibility. But Bobbies, they do not care about good intentions. They need someone who knows what they are doing." Billy looked back and forth between them. "Should I stay too?" Jake shook his head. "No, but I need you to do something for me. Drive into town first thing tomorrow morning. Go to the general store and buy everything a baby might need. Diapers, formula, clothes, toys, whatever Mrs. Henderson thinks is important. Use the ranch account." "What do I tell people if they ask questions?" "Tell them the truth," Jake said. "We're helping out a family member who's going through a rough patch. It's not entirely a lie." Billy nodded and headed for the door. "I'll get an early start. Mrs. Henderson will know what to buy." After Billy left, Carlos settled into the rocking chair by the kitchen window, Emma still sleeping peacefully in his arms. Jake watched them for a moment, struck by how natural the scene looked. The kitchen suddenly felt more like a home than it had in years. "Carlos," Jake said quietly, "what do you really think about all this?" The older man considered the question carefully before answering. I think that sometimes life sends us exactly what we need, even when we do not know we need it. You have been alone too long. This ranch, it is too quiet for a man your age. Jake felt a flush of embarrassment. I'm fine on my own. Are you? Carlos's dark eyes were kind but penetrating. When was the last time you laughed, really laughed? When was the last time you looked forward to coming home at the end of the day? The questions hit closer to home than Jake cared to admit. Since his father's death, the ranch had become more obligation than joy. He worked from dawn until dark, then fell into bed exhausted, only to repeat the cycle the next day. This little one, Carlos continued, she changes everything. She makes you think about the future differently, no. She makes you want to build something, not just maintain what your father built. Jake moved to the window and looked out at the darkening mountains. What if I'm not cut out to be a father? What if I mess this up? Every parent worries about this, Carlos smiled. Even my Rosa, when our first baby came, she was terrified, but love, it teaches you what you need to know. And this little Emma, she will be a good teacher. As if responding to her name, Emma stirred and opened her eyes. She looked around the unfamiliar kitchen with curious blue eyes, showing no fear despite being in a strange place with strange people. Jake approached the rocking chair and knelt down beside it. Hey there, sweetheart, how are you feeling? Emma studied his face intently, then reached out with one tiny hand to grasp his finger. The simple gesture sent a jolt of emotion through Jake that he wasn't prepared for. She knows you, Carlos observed. Bobbies, they sense these things. She feels safe with you. The evening passed quietly as Carlos taught Jake the basics of baby care. How to warm a bottle properly, how to support Emma's head when feeding her, how to recognize the different types of cries and what they meant. Jake proved to be a quick student, his natural gentleness serving him well. As they prepared Emma for bed, using pillows and blankets to create a safe sleeping space in the master bedroom, Jake found himself thinking about the future in ways he never had before. What would it be like to wake up every morning to the sound of a baby's laughter? What would it feel like to watch her take her first steps, say her first words, start school? The thoughts both thrilled and terrified him. Around 10 o'clock, Jake finally called Sam Peterson. The lawyer answered on the third ring, his voice gravelly with sleep. Sam, it's Jake Morrison. I'm sorry to call so late, but I have an urgent question about my family history. Jake, what's wrong? Are you in some kind of trouble? Not trouble exactly, but I need to know if my father ever mentioned having a sister named Jennifer. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Jake began to wonder if the call had been dropped. Sam, are you there? I'm here, the lawyer said slowly. Jake, where is this question coming from? I found a baby today, abandoned on my property. There was a driver's license with the name Jennifer Morrison. I need to know if she could be family. Another long pause. Jake, I think you'd better come to my office tomorrow morning. There are some things about your family history that your father never wanted to discuss, but if there's a child involved. Sam, just tell me, did my father have a sister or not? Yes, the lawyer said quietly. Her name was Jennifer. She was 15 years younger than your father, more like a daughter to him than a sister. Their parents died in a car accident when Jennifer was only 2 years old and your father raised her. Jake felt the world tilt beneath his feet. What happened to her? She ran away when she was 16. Your father hired private investigators, spent thousands of dollars trying to find her, but she just vanished. It broke his heart. He never talked about her after the first few years, but I know he never stopped hoping she'd come home. So if there's a baby with the Morrison name, then she could very well be your niece, Sam finished. Jake, you need to be very careful here. If Jennifer left that baby on your property, there might be reasons, dangerous reasons. After hanging up, Jake sat in the darkened living room, trying to process everything he'd learned. Emma was his niece. The tiny girl sleeping peacefully upstairs was the daughter of the sister his father had lost decades ago. Carlos emerged from the kitchen, carrying 2 cups of coffee. You look like a man who has seen a ghost. Not a ghost, Jake said, accepting the steaming mug gratefully. The past. Jennifer Morrison was my father's sister. Emma is my niece. The older man whistled softly. So she is family. This changes things. Everything, Jake agreed. But it also creates new problems. Why did Jennifer leave Emma here? Where is she now? and why didn't she just come to the house and ask for help? They talked quietly for another hour, discussing possibilities and making plans. Carlos would stay for the next few days to help with Emma's care while Jake investigated Jennifer's situation. Billy would handle the immediate ranch work with help from the seasonal hands. As they prepared for bed, Jake made one more decision. Tomorrow, he would drive to Billings and try to trace Jennifer's last known address. He needed to understand what had driven his sister to abandon her child in the wilderness. But he also knew that regardless of what he discovered, Emma would be staying on the ranch. She was family, and family took care of family. It was a lesson his father had taught him long ago, and now it was time to put that lesson into practice. The ranch house settled into unusual quiet as Jake checked on Emma one last time before going to bed. She lay sleeping in the makeshift crib, her tiny chest rising and falling with perfect rhythm. Moonlight streamed through the window, casting silver shadows across her peaceful face. Standing there in the doorway, Jake felt something shift inside his chest, a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since his father's death, the ranch house felt truly like a home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and difficult decisions. But tonight, Emma Morrison was safe under the roof that had sheltered 3 generations of his family, and Jake Morrison was no longer alone in the vast Montana wilderness. As he drifted off to sleep, Jake's last conscious thought was a silent promise to his father's memory. Jennifer's daughter would have the love and security that Jennifer herself had never found. Whatever mistakes had been made in the past, they would not be repeated with the next generation. The mountain winds whispered through the pines outside, carrying with them the promise of change and the hope of new beginnings. The drive to Billings took Jake through some of Montana's most beautiful country, but he barely noticed the scenery. Emma sat securely in a car seat that Billy had purchased that morning, along with what seemed like half the inventory of Henderson's general store. She had been remarkably good during the 3-hour journey, sleeping most of the way and only fussing when they stopped for feeding and diaper changes. Jake had left Carlos at the ranch with strict instructions to call immediately if anything unusual happened. The older man had accepted the responsibility with his characteristic calm competence, but Jake could see the worry in his eyes. They all understood that venturing into Jennifer's world might bring unwanted attention back to the ranch. The address on Jennifer's driver's license led Jake to a rundown apartment complex on the outskirts of Billings. The building looked like it had seen better days, with peeling paint, broken windows, and a parking lot full of potholes. This was clearly not a place where anyone would choose to raise a child. Jake parked his truck and studied the building, Emma sleeping peacefully in her car seat behind him. Apartment 2B was on the 2nd floor, accessible by an external staircase that looked none too sturdy. He could see that the apartment's windows were covered with newspaper, and there was no sign of recent occupancy. Leaving Emma safely secured in the truck where he could keep an eye on her, Jake climbed the rickety stairs and knocked on the door of apartment 2B. No answer. He tried the doorknob and found it locked, but the wood around the lock was splintered, as if the door had been forced open recently. "You looking for Jenny?" Jake turned to see an elderly woman standing on the walkway, a laundry basket balanced on her hip. She was perhaps 70, with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Yes, I am. Do you know where I might find her?" The woman looked him up and down, taking in his clean clothes, expensive truck, and general air of respectability. "You family?" "I believe so. My name is Jake Morrison. I think Jennifer might be my niece." The woman's expression softened slightly. "I'm Edith Kowalski. I live in 2A right next door. Jenny's been gone for about a week now." "Gone? Do you know where she went?" Edith glanced around nervously before answering. "Honey, can we talk somewhere more private? There's things about that girl's situation that ain't safe to discuss in the open." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October weather. "Of course. Would you like to come down to my truck? I have Jennifer's baby with me." The elderly woman's eyes widened. "She left Emma with you? Thank the Lord. I've been worried sick about that precious child." As they walked down to the truck, Edith began to fill in the gaps in Jennifer's story. She moved in about 8 months ago, already showing with the baby, sweet girl but scared of her own shadow. She worked 2 jobs trying to make ends meet, but it was never enough. Jake opened the truck door so Edith could see Emma, who was just beginning to wake up. The older woman's face lit up with genuine affection. "Hello, beautiful girl," she cooed. "I wondered what happened to you. Your mama was so worried about keeping you safe." "Mrs. Kowalski," Jake said carefully, "what exactly was Jennifer afraid of?" Edith's expression darkened. "The baby's father, man named Derek Hutchins, real piece of work if you ask me. Drug dealer from what I could tell and mean as a snake when he'd been drinking." Jake felt his jaw clench. He was abusive. Physically, emotionally, you name it. Jenny tried to hide it, but I seen the bruises, heard the shouting through the walls. She was terrified of him, but also terrified of being alone with a baby and no money. The picture was becoming clearer, and Jake didn't like what he was seeing. What changed? Why did she leave now? Derek got arrested about 2 weeks ago on drug charges. Jenny thought it was her chance to get away clean, but then she found out he'd made bail. Word was that he was looking for her, and he was real angry about something. Emma had fully awakened and was beginning to fuss. Jake lifted her from the car seat, and she immediately settled against his shoulder. Edith watched the interaction with approval. "You're good with her," she observed. "She remembers you somehow." "I only met her yesterday," Jake said, but even as he spoke the words, he realized they weren't entirely accurate. Emma did seem to recognize him, responding to his voice and touch in ways that surprised even him. "Children know things," Edith said simply. "They know who they can trust. Jenny, she used to talk about family sometimes. Said she had a brother who lived on a big ranch somewhere, but she could never go home because of something that happened when she was young." Jake's heart ached at the thought of Jennifer carrying that pain for so many years. Whatever had driven her away from the ranch as a teenager, it had kept her from reaching out even when she desperately needed help. "Mrs. Kowalski, do you have any idea where Jennifer might have gone?" The elderly woman shook her head sadly. "No, but I can tell you she left in a hurry, packed up everything in the middle of the night and was gone by morning. But she did leave something for you if you really are her brother." Jake's pulse quickened. "What kind of something?" "A letter. She asked me to give it to anyone who came looking for Emma, anyone who seemed like family. Hold on." Edith hurried back up to her apartment and returned a few minutes later with a sealed envelope. Jake's name was written on the front in the same shaky handwriting he'd seen on the note in the diaper bag. With trembling fingers, Jake opened the envelope and read. "Jake, if you're reading this, then you found Emma. I'm sorry I had to leave her like that, but I didn't know what else to do. Derek got out of jail and he's coming for us. He doesn't want Emma, but he'll hurt her just to hurt me. I know you probably don't remember me. I was so little when I left, and I know Dad probably never talked about me after I ran away. But I never forgot you or the ranch. I used to dream about coming home, but I was too ashamed of the things I'd done, the mistakes I'd made. Emma deserves better than the life I can give her. She deserves to grow up safe and loved the way I should have. You're good people, Jake. I can see it in your eyes when I watch you through the trees. You'll take care of her the way Dad took care of me before I screwed everything up. Don't try to find me. Derek will follow anyone who gets close to me, and I won't let him hurt my baby or my family. Maybe someday when Emma's older, I can explain everything to her. Tell her that leaving her was the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the most important. I love you both. Jennifer." Jake had to read the letter twice before the words fully sank in. Jennifer had been watching him, studying him, before making the decision to leave Emma at the cabin. This hadn't been a random abandonment, but a carefully planned decision by a desperate mother who saw no other way to protect her child. "She was watching me?" he asked Edith. "Oh yes, honey. She drove out to your ranch several times over the past month. Never got out of the car, just sat and watched. She said she needed to make sure you were the kind of man she remembered, the kind of man who would love Emma the way she deserved." The revelation hit Jake like a physical blow. While he had been going about his daily routine, oblivious to any danger, his sister had been conducting her own surveillance, making the most important decision of her life based on what she observed. Emma began to cry, sensing the tension in Jake's voice and body. He bounced her gently while his mind raced through the implications of Jennifer's letter. "Mrs. Kowalski, this Derek Hutchins, do you think he's still looking for Jennifer?" "I'd bet money on it. He's the type who doesn't like to lose, and having a woman leave him would be something he'd take real personal." Jake made a quick decision. "I need to ask you a favor. If anyone comes around asking about Jennifer or the baby, you never saw me, and you don't know anything about where they went." Edith nodded emphatically. Honey, I wouldn't tell that man the time of day if my life depended on it, but you be careful. Derek Hutchins has friends, and they're not the kind of people you want to mess with. As Jake prepared to leave Billings, he stopped at the local sheriff's office to report what he'd learned about Derek Hutchins. The deputy he spoke with was familiar with the name and confirmed that Hutchins was indeed a known drug dealer with a history of violence against women. If you know where Jennifer Morrison is, the deputy said, she needs to know that Hutchins made bail 2 days ago and immediately started asking questions about her. We've had reports of him and his associates making threats. Jake chose his words carefully. I don't know where she is, but if I hear from her, I'll make sure she knows to contact law enforcement. The drive back to the ranch felt longer than the morning trip to Billings. Emma slept fitfully, picking up on Jake's tension despite his efforts to remain calm. The enormity of the situation was beginning to sink in. By taking Emma, he had potentially made himself and everyone on the ranch a target for Derek Hutchins and his criminal associates. But as he looked at Emma's peaceful face in the rearview mirror, Jake knew he would make the same choice again without hesitation. This little girl was innocent, and she deserved protection regardless of the cost. The sun was setting behind the mountains as Jake turned onto the ranch road. The familiar sight of the gate with its weathered Morrison Ranch sign filled him with relief. This was home, the place where 3 generations of his family had built something good and lasting. Emma belonged here, and he would defend her right to be here with everything he had. Carlos met him at the truck, his face creased with worry. How did it go, Jefe? Complicated, Jake replied, lifting Emma from her car seat. We need to talk, but first let me get her settled. As they walked toward the house, Jake noticed that Carlos was carrying his rifle, expecting trouble. Always, the older man replied seriously. Billy called from town. He heard some strangers were asking questions about you at the diner. Jake felt his blood turn to ice. What kind of questions? About whether you lived alone, how many people worked the ranch, things like that. Billy pretended not to know much, but Mrs. Henderson told him the men didn't look like they belonged around here. Inside the house, Jake quickly fed Emma and put her down for the night while filling Carlos in on everything he'd learned in Billings. The older man listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious with each revelation. So this Derek, he is coming here, Carlos said when Jake finished. Maybe, probably. I don't know how much Jennifer told him about the ranch, but if he's determined enough. Then we need to be ready. Carlos stood up and walked to the gun cabinet in the corner of the living room. I will call my nephew Miguel. He is good with security systems, and Billy's brother Tommy, he was military police. They will help. Jake nodded gratefully. In the isolation of the Montana wilderness, neighbors looked out for neighbors, and the bonds forged by shared hardship ran deep. He had no doubt that if Derek Hutchins came looking for trouble, he would find more than he bargained for. But even as he made plans to defend the ranch, Jake's thoughts kept returning to Jennifer. Somewhere out there, his sister was running from a dangerous man, carrying the weight of a terrible choice. She had sacrificed her own happiness to keep Emma safe, and now Jake was the guardian of that precious gift. Emma stirred in her makeshift crib, making soft baby sounds in her sleep. Jake reached down and gently stroked her dark hair, marveling at how completely she had transformed his life in just 2 days. Don't worry, sweetheart, he whispered. You're safe now. Uncle Jake isn't going to let anyone hurt you. Outside, the Montana wind carried the scent of snow from the high peaks, a reminder that winter was coming. It would be a time of isolation and harsh weather, but also a time when the ranch became a fortress protected by the natural barriers of mountain and storm. If Derek Hutchins wanted to find Emma, he would have to come through Jake Morrison first, and Jake was ready for that fight. 3 weeks had passed since Jake found Emma in the mountain cabin, and the ranch had settled into a new rhythm that revolved around the needs of a 6-month-old baby. What had seemed impossible at first was gradually becoming second nature, though Jake still marveled at how completely Emma had transformed every aspect of his daily life. The early November snow had arrived ahead of schedule, blanketing the ranch in 18 inches of pristine white that made the mountains look like something from a Christmas card. The snow also provided an additional layer of security, as any vehicles approaching the ranch would leave tracks that could be spotted from miles away. Jake had been sleeping lighter than usual, his subconscious mind attuned to any sound that might indicate danger. So when thunder's sharp whinny cut through the pre-dawn darkness on a Tuesday morning, Jake was instantly awake and reaching for the rifle beside his bed. The luminous dial on his bedside clock showed 4:47 a.m. Emma was still sleeping peacefully in the crib they had set up in the master bedroom, her breathing steady and undisturbed. But Thunder's warning had been unmistakable, and the horse had never given false alarms in all the years Jake had owned him. Moving quietly to the window, Jake peered out at the snow-covered landscape. The ranch yard looked normal in the pale moonlight, but something had definitely spooked Thunder. The horse was packing restlessly in his paddock, ears pricked forward as he stared toward the main road. Jake quickly pulled on his clothes and boots, then checked his rifle to make sure it was loaded. Before leaving the bedroom, he took one last look at Emma, sleeping innocently under her pink blankets. Whatever was coming, he would not let it reach her. Carlos appeared in the hallway, also fully dressed and carrying his shotgun. The older man's military training from his youth in El Salvador had never left him, and he possessed an almost supernatural ability to sense danger. "You heard it too," Jake whispered. Thunder, is not happy about something. Miguel's motion sensors have been quiet, but animals know things that machines cannot detect. Miguel Restrepo, Carlos's nephew, had installed a sophisticated security system around the ranch house and outbuildings the week before. Hidden cameras and motion detectors now monitored every approach to the property, feeding information to a control panel in Jake's office. They made their way quietly to the office, where the security monitors showed nothing but peaceful snow-covered landscape. But Jake trusted Thunder's instincts more than any electronic system. If the horse was agitated, there was a reason. There, Carlos pointed to one of the monitors showing the view down the main access road. "Do you see it?" Jake squinted at the screen and caught a glimpse of movement near the tree line, perhaps half a mile from the house. It looked like someone on foot, moving carefully through the forest that bordered the road. "Just one person?" Jake asked. "I think so, but it is hard to tell. They are staying in the shadows." Jake felt his jaw clench. After 3 weeks of watching and waiting, it appeared that Derek Hutchins or one of his associates had finally found them. The isolation that usually protected the ranch was now working against them, as help from the sheriff's department was at least 45 minutes away. But they were not defenseless. In addition to Carlos and Jake himself, Tommy Morrison, Billy's older brother and no relation to Jake despite sharing the surname, had moved into the bunkhouse for the duration of the crisis. The former military police officer brought tactical experience and an arsenal of weapons that he had accumulated during his years in the service. "I'll wake Tommy," Jake said. "You keep watching the monitors." Tommy was already awake when Jake reached the bunkhouse, sitting on the edge of his bunk and lacing up his combat boots. At 32, he was 6 years older than Billy and possessed a calm intensity that came from having seen real combat during 2 tours in Afghanistan. "Motion sensors picked up something about 10 minutes ago," Tommy said without looking up. "Single individual moving parallel to the road but staying in the tree cover. Professional movement patterns." "How professional?" "Professional enough to avoid most of the sensors, but not quite good enough to avoid all of them. Either military training or extensive criminal experience." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November cold. "Any sign of backup?" "Not yet, but that doesn't mean much. If this is a reconnaissance mission, they might have people staged further out." Tommy finished tying his boots and stood up, his movements economical and precise. He had already strapped on a tactical vest loaded with ammunition and equipment, and his assault rifle hung from a sling across his shoulder. "What's the plan?" Jake asked. "We intercept them before they get close to the house. Create a standoff situation where we have all the advantages." Tommy checked his rifle methodically. "The snow works in our favor. They can't approach without leaving tracks, and they can't move fast through the drifts." They made their way back to the house, where Carlos was still monitoring the screens. Billy had arrived from his trailer near the barn, looking nervous but determined. At 26, he was the youngest and least experienced of the group, but his loyalty to Jake was absolute. "Status?" Tommy asked. "Still just one that we can see," Carlos replied. "But they have stopped moving. I think they are watching the house." Jake checked his watch. 5:23 a.m. Dawn was still more than an hour away, which gave the intruder the advantage of darkness but also limited their visibility. It was a tactical stalemate that could not last indefinitely. "We need to know who we're dealing with," Jake said. "If this is law enforcement, we handle it one way. If it's Derek Hutchins or his people, we handle it differently." Tommy nodded. "I'll circle around and try to get a visual identification. Carlos, can you and Billy create a distraction? Turn on some lights, make some noise, draw their attention to the front of the house." "What about Emma?" Jake asked, the baby's safety his primary concern. "She stays in the house with you. If this goes bad, you barricade yourself in the bedroom with her and wait for backup. Don't try to be a hero." As Tommy prepared to move out, Emma's cry echoed through the house. The timing could not have been worse, but Bobby's followed their own schedules regardless of external circumstances. "Go take care of her," Carlos said. "We will handle this." Jake reluctantly left the security office and made his way to the bedroom, where Emma was fully awake and demanding attention. As he lifted her from the crib, Jake found himself struck by the surreal contrast between the domestic scene and the potentially deadly situation developing outside. "Hey there, sweetheart," he whispered, settling into the rocking chair with her. "Uncle Jake needs you to be really quiet for a while, okay?" Emma seemed to sense the tension in his voice and settled against his shoulder without her usual fussing. Jake marveled at her ability to respond to his emotional state, as if some invisible connection existed between them. Through the bedroom window, Jake could see Tommy's dark form moving through the snow toward the tree line where the intruder was hidden. The former MP moved with the smooth efficiency of someone who had done this many times before, his figure barely visible against the white landscape. Carlos and Billy had turned on the floodlights around the house and barn, creating pools of brightness that would attract the intruder's attention while simultaneously destroying their night vision. It was a calculated risk that would make Tommy's approach easier while potentially exposing the house to observation. Jake's satellite phone buzzed with an incoming text message from Tommy. "Visual contact. Single male, approximately 30 years old, armed with handgun. Does not appear to be law enforcement. Maintaining observation." The description could fit Derek Hutchins, though Jake had never seen a photo of the man. Regardless of the intruder's identity, their presence on the ranch at 5:30 a.m. was not coincidental. Emma had fallen back asleep in Jake's arms, her tiny body warm and trusting against his chest. Looking down at her peaceful face, Jake felt a surge of protective fury that surprised him with its intensity. This innocent child had already endured more upheaval in her short life than most people experienced in decades. Another text from Tommy. "Subject is moving toward house. Appears to be conducting reconnaissance. Still no sign of backup, but recommend immediate law enforcement notification." Jake reluctantly shifted Emma to her crib and reached for his satellite phone. The Gallatin County Sheriff's Department had been notified about the potential threat weeks ago, and Deputy Marcus Chen had given Jake a direct number for emergency situations. "Chen here," the deputy's voice was alert despite the early hour. "Deputy Chen, this is Jake Morrison. We have an armed intruder on the ranch. Single male, armed, conducting surveillance of the house. Are you in immediate danger?" "Not at the moment, but we have a 6-month-old baby in the house, and reason to believe this is connected to Derek Hutchins." "Understood. I'm dispatching units to your location, but response time will be approximately 30 minutes due to the snow conditions. Can you maintain defensive positions until we arrive?" "Yes, we're prepared for that. Do not engage unless directly threatened. Hutchins has a history of violence, and we don't want this to escalate unnecessarily." After ending the call, Jake felt somewhat relieved knowing that professional help was on the way. But 30 minutes was an eternity when dealing with an armed intruder who might have reinforcements nearby. Tommy's next message was more concerning. "Subject has circled around to rear of house. Lost visual contact. Recommend all personnel move to secure positions." Jake quickly gathered Emma's emergency supplies and carried her to the walk-in closet in the master bedroom. The small space was the most secure location in the house, with no windows and only one entrance that he could easily defend. As he settled Emma on a pile of blankets in the corner of the closet, Jake heard the soft crunch of footsteps in the snow outside the bedroom window. The sound was barely audible, but in the crystalline silence of the mountain night, it might as well have been a thunderclap. Whoever was out, there was now directly outside the room where Emma slept. Jake positioned himself near the closet doorway with his rifle, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. Through the bedroom window, he could see a dark shape moving past the glass, trying to peer inside without exposing themselves to observation. The shape paused directly in front of the window, and Jake caught his first clear glimpse of the intruder. It was a man of medium height and build, wearing dark winter clothing and a knit cap pulled low over his face. More importantly, he was carrying a pistol in his right hand. For several long seconds, the man remained motionless at the window, apparently studying the interior of the bedroom. Jake held his breath, hoping that Emma would remain asleep and that the darkness inside the room would conceal his presence. Then the man tried the window, testing to see if it was locked. Jake's finger tightened on the trigger as every instinct screamed at him to shoot. But Tommy's warnings echoed in his mind. Engaging too early could escalate the situation and potentially endanger Emma if the intruder had backup nearby. The window was locked, as Jake had ensured weeks ago when the security preparations began. Frustrated, the man moved away from the window and disappeared from view. But Jake knew he would try another approach, and the next attempt might be more aggressive. Emma stirred in her blankets, but remained asleep. Jake offered a silent prayer of gratitude for her calm temperament, knowing that a crying baby would immediately reveal their location to anyone within earshot. His phone buzzed with another message from Tommy. Subject attempting entry at kitchen door, moving to intercept. The kitchen was on the opposite side of the house from the master bedroom, which gave Jake some comfort. But it also meant that Tommy would be engaging the intruder alone, at least until Carlos and Billy could provide support. Jake found himself torn between his responsibility to protect Emma and his desire to help defend his friends. But the choice was clear. Emma's safety came first, and his job was to ensure that she remained hidden and protected regardless of what happened in the rest of the house. Through the closet wall, Jake could hear muffled sounds of movement in the kitchen. Someone was definitely trying to break in, and the attempt was becoming more aggressive. The solid construction of the ranch house would slow down any forced entry, but it would not stop a determined intruder indefinitely. Then Jake heard Tommy's voice, loud and clear through the mountain air. "Stop right there. Drop your weapon and put your hands where I can see them." The response was immediate and violent. The sharp crack of a pistol shot echoed across the snow-covered landscape, followed by the deeper boom of Tommy's rifle. Emma woke at the sound of gunfire, her eyes wide with fear as she began to cry. Jake quickly lifted her to his shoulder, whispering softly in an attempt to calm her while straining to hear what was happening outside. More shots were fired, at least 3 or 4 in rapid succession. Jake could distinguish between the sharp reports of the handgun and the distinctive sound of Carlos's shotgun. The firefight seemed to be moving around the house, suggesting that the intruder was attempting to escape. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, silence returned to the mountain night. Jake's phone buzzed with a message from Tommy. "Suspect down. Secure the area until law enforcement arrives." Jake felt his knees go weak with relief. The immediate threat was over, but he remained in the closet with Emma until he heard Tommy's voice calling his name from inside the house. "Jake, all clear. You and Emma can come out." Carrying Emma carefully, Jake emerged from the closet to find Tommy standing in the bedroom doorway, his rifle still at the ready. The former MP's face was grim but calm, showing no signs of the adrenaline that must have been coursing through his system. "Is he dead?" Jake asked. "No, but he's not going anywhere. Took a round in the leg and another in the shoulder. Carlos is keeping an eye on him while Billy tends to his wounds." "Any idea who he is?" Tommy held up a wallet he had recovered from the intruder. "According to his ID, his name is Marcus Webb. Ring any bells?" Jake shook his head. "Never heard of him, but that doesn't mean he's not working for Derek Hutchins." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Derek Hutchins chose that moment to make his presence known. Jake's satellite phone rang, the caller ID showing an unknown number. "Mr. Morrison?" The voice was smooth and confident, with an undercurrent of menace that made Jake's skin crawl. "Who is this?" "I think you know who this is. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Jake carried Emma to the living room, where Carlos was indeed standing guard over a wounded man who lay zip-tied and bandaged on the couch. The intruder was conscious but clearly in pain, his face pale and drawn. "I don't have anything that belongs to you," Jake said into the phone. Derek Hutchins laughed, a sound devoid of any humor. "Really? Because I have reliable information that you're currently in possession of my daughter. Emma is my niece, Jennifer is my sister. Jennifer is my woman, and Emma is my child. Biology doesn't matter as much as possession, Mr. Morrison, and I intend to take possession of what's mine." Jake felt his temper flare. "Over my dead body." "That can be arranged," Hutchins replied casually. "In fact, that's exactly what I had in mind. You see, Mr. Morrison, you've caused me considerable inconvenience. Jennifer took something else when she ran away, something worth a great deal of money. Until I get it back, I need the leverage that Emma provides." The implication hit Jake like a physical blow. Emma wasn't just Derek's daughter in his twisted mind. She was a bargaining chip in some larger criminal enterprise. "What did Jennifer take?" "Let's just say she had access to certain business records that could be embarrassing to me and my associates if they fell into the wrong hands." Jake understood now why Jennifer had been so desperate to protect Emma. Derek Hutchins wasn't just an abusive boyfriend. He was a criminal who would use his own child as leverage in whatever illegal activities he was involved in. "The police are on their way," Jake said. "You might want to disappear before they arrive." "The police don't concern me, Mr. Morrison. I have friends in many places, and small-town law enforcement is easily managed. What concerns me is that you seem to think you can keep something that belongs to me. Emma belongs here. This is her home." "We'll see about that," Hutchins said. "Enjoy your victory tonight, Mr. Morrison, but this isn't over, not by a long shot." The line went dead, leaving Jake staring at the phone with a mixture of rage and determination. Derek Hutchins had just made the biggest mistake of his life by threatening Emma and the ranch. As the wail of sirens echoed across the snow-covered mountains, announcing the arrival of the sheriff's department, Jake looked down at Emma's sleeping face and made a silent vow. Derek Hutchins would never get his hands on this innocent child. The war for Emma's future was just beginning. 6 months had passed since the confrontation with Derek Hutchins's associate, and spring had returned to the Montana mountains with a vengeance. The snow that had protected the ranch through the winter was now rushing down the mountainsides in torrents, filling streams and rivers with the promise of new life. Jake stood on the ranch house porch, watching Emma take her first tentative steps across the wooden planks. At 13 months old, she was a bundle of energy and curiosity, with her father's dark hair but eyes that reminded Jake powerfully of his sister Jennifer. Every day, Emma grew more beautiful and more precious to everyone on the ranch. The legal battle with Derek Hutchins had been complex and emotionally draining, but it was finally over. The drug dealer was now serving a 15-year sentence in federal prison on charges ranging from narcotics trafficking to attempted kidnapping. The evidence Jennifer had taken when she fled turned out to be detailed records of Hutchins's criminal organization, information that had helped the FBI dismantle an entire drug distribution network. But the most significant development had come just 2 weeks ago, when a familiar truck had turned up the ranch road, carrying a passenger Jake had never expected to see again. Jennifer Morrison stepped out of the passenger seat like someone emerging from a long, dark tunnel into sunlight. At 24, she was still beautiful, but the haunted look in her eyes spoke of experiences that no young woman should have endured. She moved carefully, as if expecting danger to materialize at any moment. The reunion between Jake and his sister had been awkward at first, weighted down by years of separation and mutual guilt. But Emma had been the bridge that brought them together, the innocent child whose laughter dissolved the barriers that time and pain had erected. "She's grown so much," Jennifer said now, settling into the porch swing beside Jake as they watched Emma chase butterflies in the yard. "I can't believe how much I missed in just 6 months." "You missed what you had to miss," Jake replied gently. "You did what was necessary to protect her." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears, as they often did when the conversation turned to the months she had spent in federal witness protection. "I should have come to you sooner, should have trusted that you would help us. You were 16 when you left here, Jenny. You were scared and hurt and dealing with things no kid should have to handle. But you're home now, and that's what matters." The story of Jennifer's teenage years had slowly emerged over the past 2 weeks, a tale of survival on the streets that had both broken Jake's heart and filled him with admiration for his sister's resilience. She had run away after a confrontation with their father over her dating an older boy, a decision that seemed so trivial in hindsight, but had felt life-changing to a frightened teenager. Pride and fear had kept her away for years, even when she wanted desperately to come home. By the time she met Derek Hutchins, she was working as a waitress and living paycheck to paycheck, vulnerable to the attention of a man who initially seemed caring and protective. "I keep thinking about all the times I could have called," Jennifer continued. "All the times I drove past the ranch entrance but couldn't work up the courage to turn in." "You were protecting yourself the only way you knew how," Jake said. "And when it mattered most, you made sure Emma was safe. That took courage." Carlos emerged from the barn, his weathered face creased in a smile as he watched Emma's adventures in the yard. The older man had become completely devoted to the child, teaching her Spanish words and showing her the gentlest possible introduction to ranch life. "She is going to be trouble, that one," Carlos said with obvious pride. "Yesterday I found her trying to feed carrots to the chickens." "The chickens probably appreciated the attention," Jake laughed. The transformation of the ranch over the past 6 months had been remarkable. What had been a quiet, solitary place had become a home filled with laughter and activity. Billy had married his longtime girlfriend Sarah in a small ceremony on the ranch, and they had moved into the foreman's house near the main entrance. Tommy had decided to stay permanently, taking over security responsibilities and helping with the expanding cattle operation. But the most significant change was in Jake himself. The lonely bachelor who had discovered Emma in that remote cabin had evolved into something he never thought he could be: a father. The legal adoption had been finalized just 3 days ago, making Emma officially a Morrison and ensuring that no future legal challenges could threaten her place in the family. "Jake," Jennifer said quietly, "I need to talk to you about something important." He turned to look at his sister, nodding the serious expression on her face. "What's on your mind?" "The FBI has offered me a place in the Witness Protection Program. A new identity, a fresh start somewhere far from Montana. They think it would be safer for everyone involved." Jake felt his heart sink. He had known this conversation was coming, had seen the way Jennifer looked toward the horizon with a mixture of longing and fear. She loved Emma desperately, but she also carried the weight of knowing that her presence might bring danger to the ranch. "What do you want to do?" he asked carefully. "I want to stay here," she said immediately. "I want to help raise my daughter and rebuild my relationship with my family, but I'm scared, Jake. What if there are other people out there, people we don't know about, who might want to hurt Emma because of what I did?" Before Jake could respond, the sound of an approaching vehicle drew their attention to the main road. A sheriff's department cruiser was making its way up the winding drive, followed by what appeared to be an unmarked federal vehicle. Deputy Marcus Chen stepped out of the cruiser, his expression serious but not alarmed. Behind him, 2 people in business suits emerged from the federal vehicle: a middle-aged woman with graying hair and a younger man who carried himself with the confident bearing of law enforcement. "Mr. Morrison, Miss Morrison," Deputy Chen called out as they approached the porch. "These are agents from the FBI. They'd like to speak with you both." The woman stepped forward and showed her credentials. "I'm Agent Susan Martinez, and this is Agent David Park. We're here with some news about the Derek Hutchins case." Jake instinctively moved closer to Jennifer, who had gone pale at the mention of Hutchins's name. Emma, sensing the tension, toddled over to her uncle and raised her arms to be picked up. "Is there somewhere we can talk privately?" Agent Martinez asked. They gathered in the ranch house living room, Emma playing quietly on the floor with her toys while the adults settled around the coffee table. Agent Martinez opened a file folder and pulled out several photographs. "Derek Hutchins was found dead in his prison cell 3 days ago," she announced without preamble. The silence that followed was profound. Jennifer's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Jake felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief that the threat was finally over, but also unease at the implications of Hutchins's death. "How?" Jennifer asked in a whisper. "Officially, suicide," Agent Park replied. "But we have reason to believe he was killed by associates who were concerned about what else he might reveal to federal investigators." Agent Martinez leaned forward. "Miss Morrison, We believe that Derek's death effectively ends any threat to you or your daughter. The criminal organization he was part of has been completely dismantled, and our intelligence suggests that no one else has any interest in pursuing you." "Are you certain?" Jake asked. "As certain as we can be in these situations," Agent Martinez replied. "However, we're still prepared to offer Miss Morrison placement in witness protection if she prefers." Jennifer looked at Emma, who was now crawling toward her mother with a bright smile on her face. The little girl had adapted to her mother's return with the resilience that only children possessed, accepting Jennifer's presence as naturally as she had accepted Jake's care months before. "I don't want to run anymore," Jennifer said firmly. "I want to stay here and be part of my daughter's life. This is where we belong." Agent Park nodded approvingly. "We think that's probably the safest choice at this point. The ranch is isolated enough to provide natural security, and you have people here who are obviously committed to protecting you." After the agents left, the ranch seemed to settle into an almost surreal peace. The months of tension and fear were finally over, leaving behind the simple reality of a family learning to be together again. That evening, as the sun set behind the western peaks, Jake found himself on the porch again, this time holding Emma while Jennifer prepared dinner in the kitchen. The domestic scene felt both miraculous and perfectly natural, as if this was how things had always been meant to be. "You know," he said to Emma, "your mommy and I used to sit on this porch when we were kids, watching the sunset and making up stories about the adventures we were going to have when we grew up." Emma babbled happily in response, her small hands grasping at the string of his jacket. She was too young to understand the words, but Jake could tell she enjoyed the sound of his voice. Jennifer appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Dinner's almost ready. Carlos and Billy should be here any minute." The tradition of family dinners had begun shortly after Jennifer's return, a way of cementing the bonds that connected everyone who called the Morrison Ranch home. Tonight, they would be celebrating the final resolution of the Derek Hutchins situation, but also looking forward to a future that suddenly seemed bright with possibility. "Jake," Jennifer said, settling into the chair beside him, "I want to thank you for something." "You don't need to thank me for anything." "Yes, I do. You saved my daughter's life, but more than that, you gave her something I never could have provided alone, a real home and a family who loves her unconditionally." Jake looked down at Emma, who was now sleeping peacefully in his arms. "She's not just your daughter anymore, Jenny. She's our daughter, and this is her family, all of us." The truth of those words resonated in the mountain air as Carlos and Billy arrived for dinner, their voices carrying across the yard as they discussed the day's work and made plans for tomorrow. This was what family sounded like, Jake realized. Not just blood relations, but people who had chosen to build something good and lasting together. As they gathered around the dining room table, Emma in her high chair between Jake and Jennifer, the conversation flowed easily from ranch business to family memories to plans for the future. Sarah was pregnant with her and Billy's first child, which meant Emma would soon have a cousin to play with. Carlos was teaching Jennifer to ride again, helping her reclaim skills she had learned as a child but forgotten during her years away from the ranch. After dinner, when Emma had been bathed and put to bed, Jake and Jennifer found themselves back on the porch, sharing a bottle of wine and talking about the years they had lost. "Do you think she'll remember any of this?" Jennifer asked, gazing up at Emma's bedroom window where a soft nightlight glowed. "The fear, the running, Derek." "I hope not," Jake replied. "But even if she does, she'll also remember being loved and protected. She'll remember growing up surrounded by people who would do anything for her." Jennifer smiled, the haunted look finally beginning to fade from her eyes. "She's going to have such a different childhood than I did." "Than we did," Jake corrected. "But that's the point, isn't it? Each generation gets the chance to do better than the one before." As if summoned by their conversation about the future, Emma's voice drifted down from her bedroom window. Not crying, but making the happy babbling sounds that meant she was playing contentedly with her toys instead of sleeping. "I should go check on her," Jennifer said, starting to rise. "Let me," Jake offered. "You've been with her all day. Besides, she probably just wants someone to read her another story." He found Emma sitting up in her crib, holding her favorite stuff,